Hi, welcome to Initiation into Mystery, our 15-part series. Hi, welcome to Initiation into Mystery. This is our 15-part series on the mysteries of the Rosary, how to work with them, how to use them, how to treat them as a story that invites you to tell your story. Today we are on part 10, the Crucifixion. Here we are.
Christianity regards this as the central event, right? This is the big moment. It's not, early on, people talked a lot about the Nativity, and during the Middle Ages, there was a great deal of attention given to the Pentecost. But in terms of the foundations of Christian theology, the crucifixion is kind of it, right?
Although you will notice that on my rosary, there is not a cross. And on a lot of people's rosaries here in the group, there is not a cross at the end.
And on my rosary, there are a bunch of miraculous medals and a black Madonna and a very, very, very teeny little tiny
cross. But the cross is a very, very complicated symbol. This is a very complicated event. And what we will not do tonight is descend into what we call the pornography of violence of this event, which Christianity has reveled in.
Right.
Christianity has reveled in the details of the execution with a kind of ecstatic joy that is perverse.
We're not even really going to talk tonight about, there are a lot of details about the crucifixion because it figures so prominently in all four of the Gospels and so prominently in Christian theology that there's a great deal of lore about it. The nails, the spear in Jesus' side, the things he said.
The water, the vinegar,
so forth and so on.
One of the thieves was saved and one of the thieves was damned. Right. There's a lot of lore here.
There's a lot of narrative detail in it.
Except here's the salient feature for us in the Rosary. The mother. She's present. It's her story, the first 5 mysteries of the Rosary. And then she's not there for the next 2. Although she's considered often presented outside the gate while he's being scourged. Right. There she is on the road to Calvary. Mm-hmm. And there she is at the foot of the cross. There are, in fact, 3 women present when Jesus dies. His mother, Mary or Miriam, Miriam of Bethany or Mary Magdalene, and Mary Salome. What we have at the foot of the cross is the triple goddess. And when Jesus is dead, his body will be lowered into Mary's arms. Which Mary? His body is lowered into the body of the goddess. Yeah. Everyone who dies, without exception, is lowered into the body of the mother, into the body of the earth.
This is one of those moments when we really have to go back to that sort of core motto for our fellowship, which is ecology, not theology. Christianity wants to see the death of Jesus as a singular event, the singular event, right, in history, where God is incarnated as man, and then it's
for one time only.
For one time only, and then sacrifices himself for one time only for a mass forgiveness of sins, right? And the Christian storyline is very, very much bounded by time, right? It begins, with the creation of the world and ends with the revelation. So it's very much a linear story. And things happen once, and you live once, and then you die and, go to heaven or hell for all eternity. But this is an ecological story, and the crucifixion and what it represents is not a singular event. Crucifixion and resurrection are constantly happening. Birth and death, all beings throughout the cosmos.
Here we are at the moment of death. There is not any being that escapes death.
No.
I asked this question in this course I teach on death the other day, and I said, is death a mistake? Is death a failure? Is death an accident? Everything dies. Rocks die, mountains die, oceans die.
Stars die, right.
Every human being does. It's not wrong. It's the plan.
There was a famous Zen master, Shinryu Suzuki, and he once said, if death is a mistake, it's a mistake for everything in the universe, which means it's not a mistake.
And yet this death does feel like a mistake because it is the death of a young person at the hands of empire. It is a violent,
unjust death.
Unjust death.
Execution.
It's an execution.
And we don't
A
have
murder.
any trouble. You know, there are many different ways of looking at the mysteries, and we don't have any trouble interpreting this one in terms of current events, right? We are seeing every day people gunned down, choked, starved, left to die, executed, right?
For just reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, empire is always convinced that it's acting for the greater good.
Yeah.
We are doing this for the greater good. This is to maintain order.
That's right.
And Our Lady will say, your order is chaos.
Right.
Your order is chaos. And this is order. And that's one of the things we have to remember. This is justice being dispensed in the eyes of the Roman Empire.
Right. But I want to talk for a little bit about, let's go from the very smallest picture. Oddly enough, the Christian story presents the very smallest picture of the crucifixion. If you want to go as tiny as you can get, it's Jesus dying for the sins of all mankind on a cross. That's actually very, very small.
I am very tempted. I remember a haiku a student of Clark's wrote. Can you share it?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't one of my students. It was the National Poetry Slam winner for the haiku edition, and it's a little off color, but it's pretty funny. The haiku slam, I think it was like 1999 or something like that, was won by somebody who said, "If Jesus Christ died for my sins, then he fucking overreacted." Right? That was.
But it was the idea of it's this guilt. It's this creation of this guilt idea. Jesus. Now the Bodhisattva ideal is an ecological idea, which is beings are dying for each other.
Yeah, constantly.
There's not one God who dies for us. All beings die for each other. In Buddhism, there is these Jataka tales, which are the stories of the Buddha's incarnation as various animals. And so a man is starving out in the woods, and
a rabbit comes and throws himself on the fire so he can eat. So he doesn't starve. The rabbit is the Buddha, an earlier incarnation, who is willing to, who is following that ecological principle that goes all the way back through all of our ancestors, back to the very, very beginning.
It's so
whatever eats is also eaten.
And don't think that that's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Because we know someone who decided he was going to live off the grid and he was going to grow all his own food, and he has chickens, but then he realizes he's going to have to kill the chickens, and he goes, oh no, I don't want to kill the chickens. And a coyote breaks in that night and eats one of his chickens, and what he notices is one of the chickens steps forward just before the coyote comes, and the others step back. And the next day he walks into the yard and says to the chickens, I'm going to have to eat somebody. And one of the chickens steps forward and the others step back.
Right.
The ecological equation is all beings are dying for each other.
Right.
A tree, when the mother tree dies, her body feeds all the other trees that are in a circle around her. Whatever eats is eaten.
Death is not a mistake. And in the animal kingdom, this is made quite clear. For her birthday a few years ago, I gave Perdita a book called something everlasting.
The Animal Way of Death.
Something everlasting.
Life everlasting.
Life everlasting.
The Animal Way of Death.
And in the very first chapter, he describes not a dung beetle, an undertaker beetle. This is a type of beetle that basically comes whenever a mouse dies. And so the undertaker beetle will look for a dying mouse, and he'll find one, and then he will bury himself with the mouse. And first of all, he does this little dance on top of the dead mouse.
Look, you're missing. Can I tell the story? Because I've told it a lot.
Sure.
The mouse dies. It's a very tragic event for the mouse and the mouse's family. For the undertaker beetle, it is a terrific event. He's going to party, and he gets on top of the mouse, and he does this little dance, and it says, I've got a mouse. We can get married now. And all the female undertaker beetles appear, And they start to dance with him, and he picks a mate, and then the two of them bury the mouse, eat the mouse, bury their babies in the mouth. The babies are born and eat the mouse.
Yeah.
And life goes on.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Everything that dies in the forest is food for life.
That's right.
And to imagine that as a tragedy is to imagine all of nature as a tragedy.
You know, the book of Job is another good example. In the book of Job, Job loses everything, right? He loses his health, he loses his family, and he has this long, protracted argument with God for 40 chapters. And at the very end of it, God appears to him in the whirlwind and asks him a lot of questions like, do you know where the snow comes from? Do you know how to feed all the animals? Do you know how to make it rain where it needs to rain and not to have too much rain where not too much rain needs to be? Do you know the answers to all these things? And Job finally says no. And he finally acquiesces to this ecological principle that whatever eats must also be willing to be eaten. And once he surrenders to that, everything is given back to him. Right? He is the ecological sanity of the world is restored. That's what that book is actually about. The church will tell you it's about long suffering and that God can do terrible things to you and you just have to bear with it. But that's not the message of this story.
Nor is the message of the crucifixion that Jesus died because you were bad.
Yeah.
And so you better be good so Jesus stops feeling pain.
Right.
And every time you're bad, Jesus feels more pain.
The old step lively, Jesus is coming model, right?
And that's not what's happening here at all. But let's think about the story of deep time. Let's get away from the singularity.
Yeah.
And by the way, there are gods being born and dying and sacrificing themselves all over the Middle East. Jesus is hardly the only one. You know what I mean? He is not the only one.
This is an old pattern.
This is an old story, an old pattern.
The old corn king pattern. Right.
And
it's always associated with wine and bread.
Yeah. So in any case, which doesn't mean that that story isn't true, that there aren't avatars and incarnations and embodiments of these energies. So let's think about the deep time story. We talked about creation. We talked about humanity emerging and separating itself from the animal realm. And then it feeling itself still in the garden in the beginning of the Sorrowful Mysteries, but ready to make mistakes that we're going to get it out of the garden. And then the scourging begins. Agriculture, domestication of animals.
Right.
Hierarchies begin. The crown of thorns, leadership, cities, misogyny, war. We're all implicated. No one gets left out of the sins of civilization. And then we get to the crucifixion. And that's where we are as a species right now on this planet.
We are not entering, but we are in smack dab in the midst of a mass extinction. Only the sixth time this has happened in our planet's history. It hasn't happened for, I think, 60 million years?
60 million years.
Yeah. And so this is a massive die-off of just between now and the end of this century, at least half, if not more, of the surface species on Earth, and probably a greater percentage of the aquatic life in the sea.
And we're not just talking about the death of individual beings. We're talking about the death of whole species every day. Imagine what it's like to be the last of your species, to know your kind of being isn't coming back. What does it mean to stand with our mother, to stand with the three Marys at the foot of the cross? The disciples have run away. Yeah. Peter's pretended he doesn't know Jesus. We don't know where anybody else is. They're gone.
John is supposed to be hanging out there.
Yeah, but he's a stand-in for Mary Magdalene. That's yes. It's the three women. And so the women have not run away. They have the courage to bear witness to this horror. They aren't pretending it's not happening. The problem today we face is that people want to look away from the horrors of empire. Yeah,
people want to really want to pretend it's not happening. And I noticed that Connor pointed out that says that Jesus was laid in his mother's arms to return to the goddess and to the earth. And that's quite true. You know, there are the seven sorrows, and the seven sorrows amplify the whole crucifixion story a great deal. And the last two of the seven sorrows, you know, the fifth of the seven sorrows is crucifixion. The sixth is Jesus being lowered into his mother's arms, which is that familiar
Which
image
I spoke of at the beginning of this.
And then the one after that is the laying of the body of Jesus back in the tomb, in the womb of the earth.
But let's go back to bearing witness to this.
Well, that is bearing witness, though, because they're willing, they are present to that whole process, and they're
going to touch that body.
Yeah.
They're going to wrap it in herbs. They're going to wash the blood off of it. Yeah. They are not going to pretend it hasn't happened.
No.
And they're going to be the ones who witness the resurrection.
Right.
Not the ones who run away.
No, they are secondary witnesses at best.
You know, Maureen O'Donnell mentions Ishi, the Last of His Tribe, which is just a heartbreaking book, which is about, you know, what is it like for these people around the world, the last speakers of their language, the last holders of the ancestral memory. Mm-hmm. We ourselves stand at that point.
We do.
We are right there at that moment in the cross. We may not, if you want to read the prophets of this day and age, there are ecologists, or environmentalists, or evolutionary biologists, one of whom's Clark's brother, and they're all saying the same thing. Yeah. Things are really bad for a lot of life on Earth right now.
Yeah. So, the crucifixion and the cross. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different ways of looking at that symbol of the cross. One is to view it, just as an instrument of torture, right? As Perdita alluded to, is the sort of the archetypal pornographic Christian moment where we glorify suffering and death, and then, end up becoming obsessed with it, inflicting it on others and on ourselves.
It becomes a death cult instead of a love cult.
That's right.
And it was a fertility cult.
That's right.
It was about the marriage of the god and goddess, and instead it becomes a death cult devoted to purity and sexlessness.
But that image of the cross is a very, very old image, which, if it has a circle around it, it's the primordial symbol for the earth, right? And if you just look at the cross itself without a body hanging on it, it's the intersection of heaven and earth, right? It's the vertical access and the horizontal access. It is a symbol of that divine union.
And when I cross myself, what I'm doing is unifying my chakras. I would say, in the name of the Father, and I touch my third eye. In the name of the Mother, and I go down to my womb and my root chakra. And the Holy Mama. Boom. So you go up and down and across.
That's right.
And we're sort of unifying ourselves.
Right.
So, yes, interpretationally, I understand for a lot of people why they don't want to have that symbol. The cross has become such a symbol of violence in our culture. And it has become an almost, it's been used as a weapon against other people in a way that's so upsetting. When it was a weapon.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times for me, when I think about Jesus, the child of the mother, the child of the lady, is nothing less than all of life on this planet. Yeah. And there he is. What the cross is made from a tree, a dead tree. And it's the cutting down of the sacred groves that begins both misogyny, the war against the Great Mother, and the death of ecology on this planet. People used to honor the forest. Yeah. It was a crime to cut down trees.
Yeah, and you always find these symbols overlain with one another, so that you find them layered, so that you find that even at the moment you're looking at Jesus hanging on a cross, you're looking at the leaves hanging on a tree which will fall, and the fruit that's hanging on a tree from which we take and we eat.
Or Odin hanging upside down on the world tree.
Or the hanged man. And so you're looking at all of these symbols at the same time, and they're all overlaid with one another and interpenetrated with one another. And so, it's interesting to see what a tradition will fixate on and become obsessed with. And of course, in the Christian narrative, which is based on the idea of victimhood, it focuses on that idea of the victim. Christianity never really focuses on the social justice aspect of the crucifixion. Here's a person who, from a group of people who have been colonized, who have been severely oppressed, whose women have been raped, whose men have been enslaved, and who are executing people right and left and unjustly incarcerating people constantly in order to maintain some sort of power for economic purposes. So
You're seeing the worst aspects of empire, whether it's the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, or the American Empire. And we can't pretend. We want to pretend. We want to pretend that we can, with a little tweaking, we're going to get it just right.
Yeah.
But empire and cities are the problem. Once Jesus goes into the city, he's always going to die.
Yeah.
The problem is once you enter the city, you're always going to, it's always a catastrophe.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean good things in the Bible in general. I mean, there are moments when they'll speak of Jerusalem as the shining city, and it becomes a symbol, but it's a nationalist symbol. And if you look at the symbol of Jerusalem in the Bible over and over again, you find this always a symbol of a nationalistic sort of identity and so forth and so on. And that will impute spiritual purposes to it. But for the most part, cities in the Bible are places where bad things happen. Not much good happens in a city in the Bible.
And so we get to this place in the mystery, and it's death. And we don't get to leave death out of our rosary.
Yeah.
And in America right now, a lot of people try to leave death out of their lives.
Yeah.
I mean, I am impressed with how often, we put our old people in nursing homes so we don't have to see them dying. A lot of people don't even have funerals anymore or wakes. They just have memorial services, clean it up, make the messiness go away. There always used to be someone dying at home. There was always an old person dying, a young person dying. Yeah. And you sat with them for days and days and days. And then when they were dead, you washed their body. And you buried them.
You buried them naturally. There was no embalming as such. And, there were ways to have the bodies in the home as people prayed over them, right? And the sense of the presence of the person in the body began to diminish and fade, and finally they would bury them. And they had ways of doing that.
One of the details, the cultural details that's so powerful for me is, I did not know this. My daughter taught me this for her book, which she did a lot of research about religious ritual and biblical times. And, the body would be placed in a tomb, and eventually, some years later, a family member would go back to clean it up.
Yeah.
Put the bones away.
And put the bones away, store the bones.
The bones.
Yeah. And
once the animals had come and the worms had come and the beetles had come.
The graves were designed so that the bodies would become desiccated, and then the flesh would dissolve and the bones would be left. I mean, our ancestors, lest we forget, slept oftentimes on patches of earth where they had buried the bones of their dead. Right, this idea of graveyards being segregated from population areas. Graveyards were usually right next to churches, and up until very, very recently, graveyards never existed as a thing on their own. They were always like right next to a church, and the church was right next to a group of houses. And oftentimes, the graveyards were pressed right up against, residential areas.
And the sense is, whenever you step outside, you're stepping on a grave.
That's right.
Dirt is nothing but the bodies of the dead. Our Lady says a column of saints will support you. Well, that column of saints is nothing but all of the dead that have come before you. You walk on stones. The rocks here are layered upon each other, and each layer of shale is an eon of ocean, and the compressed bodies of sea creatures are in there. It is nothing but the bodies of the dead. Everything dies. Everything around us has died. Everything we walk on is the dead.
So let's think for a moment. We've got a few minutes left. Let's think for a moment about this long timeline, this long story of our soul that Our Lady's always talking about. We mentioned it before, but just review it very briefly. The first 5 mysteries of the Rosary represent deep time. They go all the way back to the beginnings of our species, even before that.
Or the beginning of life on Earth.
The beginning of life on Earth.
That sunlight hitting the ocean.
That's right. Cells beginning to divide. And it takes us all the way up to the moment when, I guess you say the finding of Jesus in the temple is really when we sort of, begin to get our groove and find ourselves as a species. It takes place in an institutional, educational settings, basically a school where he shows up for, right? These are the teachers, the old wise men at the finding at the temple, right? And this span of time is very, 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 very long. The span of time that covers that the sorrowful mysteries cover is in the Bible, only 24 hours, but it stands for the period of time from about the time of the beginning of agriculture down
About
to the
10,000
present.
years.
Right. And if we look at that timeline, where we're at right now in the midst of this mass extinction and climate change and all of these other factors that are all converging and coming to a head in the 21st century, we're at the crucifixion now. That is the moment where we stand.
I almost think you can say, like, when you say pray your rosary, someone says, what species do you want to name when you get to the crucifixion?
Yeah, that's right.
Who's gone forever?
Yeah, you could do that. And you could say, and you'd have to have a very, very long rosary with a lot of beads just to keep up with the number of species that disappear every year. But we get to the crucifixion, and Our Lady has said, she's been very explicit about this in her yearly novena, which a lot of us just completed, that this is not the end of the story, that the decline of, quote, human civilization, human supremacy, human predation is not the same as the decline of human beings, right? This does not mean that we have to reach the end of the road as a species. It's
so important to know. We're on the last sorrowful mystery, but we're not at the end of the rosary.
We're not.
And that's the difference. And it's really, really important, this hinge moment, because we're not going to get to the next 5 mysteries without this one.
Right.
And I think it goes back also to thinking of Jesus as a singularity. The Cathars who lived in 11th and 12th century in France primarily, but in parts of Europe, were a Christian sect that believed in reincarnation, not unlike the Tibetans or the Buddhists.
Mm-hmm.
And they said Jesus and Mary Magdalene were always being reincarnated.
Right.
They were always coming back,
Yeah.
which of course makes more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They're always showing up. But what was interesting was, I've often thought one of the reasons they had to be crucified themselves was you can't maintain institutional authority with that kind of a wild card.
Yeah.
You can't control the story anymore.
It was anathema to the church. The church had to get rid of them.
And Tibetan Buddhism found a way, saying, well, there's only one incarnation, and we get the boys get to call it. So they found a way. But for the Cathars, they were saying the women and the men, everybody was being reincarnated. This story is happening over and over, just as the seasons are happening over and over and over again.
And so I think one question that we can ask ourselves, which I think is a legitimate question, is what if we are, as a species, standing at the foot of the cross right now, witnessing a mass extinction event, right? If that's where we are, what are we to do there? Like what is our role? And I think the fact that we're there, the fact that we're here, is a good beginning, right?
And
we're not running away from it. We're not trying to pretend it's not happening. We're not hiding out with Peter or the other disciples. We haven't abandoned the body on the cross. The body on the cross is not just Jesus. The body on the cross is life itself, life on this planet. We're not turning away from that. We're not pulling away from it. We're not looking away.
And there are people who always want to refashion their own rosary. There always will be. I got a better idea than all my grandmothers. And part of that often involves, I don't want to mention death.
Right.
I don't want to mention evil. I don't want to mention the bad, scary stuff.
I want it to be all light. I want it to be all brightness.
I don't want to mention darkness.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to do the sorrowful mysteries. Yeah. I'm going to skip the sorrowful mysteries. We don't want to get stuck anywhere. We don't want to get stuck not walking into the sorrowful mysteries, but we don't want to get stuck inside of them either, which is what Christianity, Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, stuck inside.
To get to the light at the end of the tunnel, you got to go through the tunnel, right? there are no turnoffs. There are no roads to the side. There are no shortcuts. The light at the end of the tunnel is the light at the end of the tunnel. Sorrowful mysteries are that tunnel, right?
And we can choose to take that pilgrimage or not. But Our Lady doesn't promise us that we're going to avoid sorrow and death.
You know, I teach haiku poetry, and one of my haiku students this past week wrote a really beautiful haiku, 17-syllable haiku about the birth of her grandson. I assigned the season word moth and asked people to write a lot of haiku on moths. And she wrote this beautiful haiku about a moth flying towards the light at the very moment that her grandson was following the light into this world, right? So the light at the end of the tunnel, which becomes synonymous for death in our culture, right? Walk towards the light, pass through death, is the light at the end of the birth canal too. It's the light that draws us out of this world and into this world in the same moment, right? It's one moment. It's one doorway. Our Lady says our going out and our coming in are all of one moment.
And that's where we're going to stop for tonight. Thank you all so much. It's been wonderful to be here. Join us next week same time, same place, where we will celebrate the resurrection for the summertime. Join us for the glorious mysteries.
It's about time.
It's been quite a spring. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.